My name is Harold Whitaker, 74 years old, born and raised in Mason Creek, Iowa. This house behind me, I built it with my own hands. Every nail, every beam. Me and Maggie, my late wife. We raised a family here. We buried our dreams here. And for 60 years, I thought this place would stand as my legacy. But then, my own son walked in. Brian, my only boy. He slammed a stack of papers on the table. His voice shook the walls. Dad, sign the house over to me. Or leave. He said it like I was nothing. Like the roof I bled for was just another deal to close. I stared at those papers. My hands trembled. Not because of fear, but because of rage. I remembered Maggie's smile the day we hung the curtains. Her laugh echoing down these halls. And now, our son, her son, wanted to erase it all. He thought he had me cornered. An old man, alone, weak. But what Brian didn't know was that I had already given this house away. Not for money, not for pride, but for something he could never touch. And when the truth comes out, he'll realize this house, this legacy, was never his to take. If you've ever felt the sting of betrayal from the ones you trusted most, stay with me, because what I'm about to tell you will change how you see family forever. And if you believe justice should never die, hit subscribe. This is my story, and it begins with revenge. My name is Harold Whitaker. I am 74 years old, born and raised in a small town called Mason Creek, Iowa. This place is not just dirt and wood. It's my entire life. I built this house with my own hands, a carpenter's hands, rough, scarred, but steady. Back in 1962, when I was just a young man, I stood on this very ground with a hammer in one hand and Maggie, my wife, in the other. We laid the first beams together. We painted the walls together. We laughed when the roof leaked the first winter. This house became more than walls. It became love carved into timber, memories sealed in concrete. Maggie is gone now, but her voice still lingers in these rooms. Her photo hangs by the fireplace. Every night, I whisper goodnight, and in the morning, I whisper hello. People in Mason Creek see me as just an old man in a rocking chair, but they don't see what I carry. Every nail in this house carries my blood. Every floorboard carries Maggie's laughter, and for 60 years, I believed this house would be my legacy, a gift to the next generation, a place to keep our name alive. But I was wrong, because one day my own son walked in and shattered everything. His name is Brian Whitaker, my only son, the boy Maggie and I prayed for, the boy I worked double shifts to raise. I gave him everything. I sold my truck so he could go to college. I skipped meals so he could have shoes on his feet. I thought he would carry our name with pride, but pride turned into greed. Somewhere along the way, Mason Creek stopped being home for Brian. It became just another piece of real estate, a house to flip, a number on a ledger. One cold evening, he stormed through the front door. His eyes didn't hold love. They held calculation, like a banker looking at a bad loan. He said he had a plan, a business venture in Des Moines, big profits, fast returns. All he needed was the house. I stared at him, my chest heavy. This was Maggie's son, my son, and he was asking me to sign away her laughter, her memories, her soul. I told him, this house is not for sale, not now, not ever. But he didn't hear me, or maybe he just didn't care. His lips curled into a smirk I had never seen before, and that smirk told me everything. Brian wasn't here as a son. He was here as a vulture, hovering over his own father, waiting for the last breath. When I look at these walls, I don't just see wood, I see Maggie. The first night we slept here, the roof leaked, water dripping on our pillows. We laughed until dawn, holding each other under one blanket. The kitchen? That's where she burned her first pie. The smell lingered for days, and yet she smiled like it was the best meal in the world. Every corner of this house carries her touch. The curtains she stitched by hand, the rocking chair she chose at the Mason Creek Fair, the rose bushes she planted by the porch. Even after she passed, those roses still bloom every spring. This is not just a house. It's Maggie's song. It's our life carved into timber. It's my sanctuary. So when Brian walked in with his papers, when he called it property, I felt something inside me break. To him, it's numbers. To me, it's vows. To him, it's leverage. To me, it's love that survived decades. I whispered under my breath that night, standing by Maggie's photo on the mantel. Don't worry, love. They won't take this from us. Not while I'm breathing. And as the cold wind howled through Mason Creek, I knew one thing. If Brian wanted war, I was ready to fight. It was late afternoon when Brian came back. The sun was setting over Mason Creek, casting long shadows through the windows. He didn't knock. He barged in, papers in his hand, a fire in his eyes, but not the kind of fire a son should have. He slammed the stack on the kitchen table, the same table where Maggie once set out Sunday dinners. The wood cracked under the force. Dad, he said, sign the house over to me, or leave. His voice cut through the air like a knife. Cold, sharp, final. I stared at the papers, legal forms, signatures waiting for my hand, a pen already clipped to the corner, like he thought this would be easy. My hands rested on the table. They trembled, not from weakness, but from rage. I looked at him, at the boy I raised, the boy I once carried on my shoulders through the Mason Creek parade. And now he stood there, treating me like a tenant in my own home. The silence grew heavy. The clock ticked on the wall. Every second felt like a hammer against my chest. Finally, I pushed the papers back, my voice steady, my eyes locked on his. This house isn't yours to take, Brian. And it never will be. His jaw clenched. His smirk returned. And in that moment, I knew this was no longer family. This was war. News travels fast in Mason Creek. Too fast. The next morning, I stepped out onto the porch. The Carters were across the street, watering their lawn. They didn't wave. They whispered. At the diner, heads turned when I walked in. Coffee cups paused mid-sip. I heard it. Soft at first, then louder. They say Brian's taking the house. Guess the old man can't keep up anymore. Imagine your own son throwing you out. Every word was a dagger. Not because they were strangers, but because some of them once ate at this table. Some of them once danced in my living room when Maggie played the piano. Now, they looked at me like I was already gone, like I was a relic about to be pushed aside. Shame burned hotter than anger. I kept my head down, paid for my black coffee, and walked back home through the empty streets. When I reached the porch, the roses Maggie planted were blooming, bright red against the morning sun. I touched the petals, and I whispered, "They'll never understand, but you would." That night, lying awake in my chair, I realized something. Brian wasn't just trying to steal my home. He was trying to bury my dignity. And if Mason Creek was going to watch, then so be it. They would see that even an old man still knows how to fight back. I didn't argue with Brian. Not after the diner. Not after the whispers. Words were useless. Shouting wouldn't save Maggie's house. So I chose silence. That night, I sat by the fireplace. Her picture looked back at me, calm as ever. I whispered, "Don't worry, Maggie. I've got this." The next morning, I put on my old work coat, the same one I wore when I built this house, and I walked to the courthouse in Mason Creek. People saw me, but nobody asked where I was going. They just shook their heads, like I was a man walking to his own funeral. Inside, the air was cold, smelled like paper and dust. I sat down across from Mr. Johnson, the town lawyer, an old friend, a man who once fought beside me at the VFW hall. I slid a folded envelope across his desk. He opened it. His eyes widened. Then he nodded. No words, no fuss, just a signature. And with that, a quiet storm began to brew. When I left the courthouse, the sun was setting over Mason Creek. The same sun Brian thought would rise on his victory. But I knew better, because silence isn't weakness. It's planning. And by the time Brian realized what I had done, it would be too late. Brian never liked waiting. And when I refused to sign, he made his own move. One afternoon, while I was fixing the porch rail, he stormed past me without a word. His eyes darted, his jaw tight. He didn't even notice Maggie's roses blooming by the steps. Later that week, whispers reached me. At the diner, the waitress leaned close and said, "Harold, Brian was at the courthouse yesterday, with papers." My stomach tightened. I walked home slower than usual, every step heavy, every breath colder. The next morning, I went back to the courthouse. The clerk behind the desk gave me a look, half pity, half anger. She slid a form across the counter, my name, written in shaky ink, but not by me. "Your son tried to file this yesterday," she said. "Claimed you signed, but it didn't pass. Too sloppy, too rushed, too fake." I stared at the signature. Brian's arrogance dripped from every crooked letter. He thought he could steal my life with a pen. The clerk leaned in. Don't worry, Harold. It's been thrown out. But he's desperate. And desperate men make dangerous choices. I folded the paper, slid it back. My hands didn't shake this time, because deep inside I felt a cold fire. Brian thought he was clever, but I was already miles ahead. It didn't take long for Brian to show his next hand. One Friday evening, I heard the roar of engines. Headlights cut across the lawn. 3 trucks rolled up the gravel drive. Brian jumped out first, and behind him, a few of his drinking buddies from town. They weren't here for a visit. They came for a show. Dad! Brian shouted, waving his arms. You've had your time. Pack your things. This house is mine now. His buddies laughed, their voices echoing under the porch light. One of them kicked at Maggie's roses. Another spat on the steps. I sat in my chair on the porch, didn't move, didn't blink. Brian stomped closer. You can't just sit there. The town's talking. Everyone knows this place is wasted on you. The words stung, but I kept my silence, because silence was stronger than shouting. He leaned down, inches from my face. Leave now, old man, or we'll move you ourselves. The porch grew quiet. Only the crickets in the field kept singing. I met his eyes, cold, desperate, burning. Then I whispered, This house doesn't belong to you, Brian, and you'll never take it from me. He flinched. For a moment, I saw the boy he used to be, but it vanished as quick as it came. He straightened up, masking his fear with rage. And I knew this fight had just crossed a line. The night was boiling with noise. Brian shouting, his buddies laughing, their boots stomping on my porch. Then headlights swept across the yard again. But these weren't pickup trucks. They were cruisers. The Mason Creek Police Department had arrived. Red and blue lights cut through the dark. For a second, Brian grinned. He thought the cavalry was here for him. Officers, he yelled. This man refuses to leave. He's trespassing on my property. His words sliced the air, his voice dripping with a false confidence. The officers stepped onto the porch. One of them, Officer Daniels, a man I'd known for 30 years, looked at me, then at Brian. He opened a folder, pulled out a stamped document, and read it aloud. This property no longer belongs to Harold Whitaker, nor to you, Brian Whitaker. As of last month, it has been legally transferred to the Mason Creek Veterans Foundation. The porch went silent. Brian's smile cracked. His buddies shifted uneasily. I sat there in my chair, watching the color drain from his face. You're lying, Brian barked. But Daniel shook his head. Paperwork's all here. Your father made sure of it. Brian staggered back, like the ground beneath him had given way. For the first time, he looked small, very small. And in that silence, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. The porch was silent. Only the crickets dared to speak. Brian's face was red, his fists clenched. He looked at the officers, then at me, like a cornered animal searching for a way out. I leaned forward in my chair. My hands rested on the armrests, steady as stone. I locked eyes with my son, not the boy I once carried on my shoulders, but the man who had turned himself into a stranger. Brian, I said, my voice low, sharp, unshakable. You think you've lost a house tonight, but what you really lost is far worse. You lost me, and you lost the last piece of your mother. His jaw tightened. I saw rage boiling, but behind it, a flicker of fear. I pressed on. This porch? These walls? They are soaked in her laughter, and you tried to erase that. You tried to erase her, but I will never let that happen. The officer said nothing. His buddies shuffled their feet, suddenly unsure why they had come. I straightened up, my words like nails hammered into wood. You may carry my name, but you'll never carry my honor. Not now. Not ever. Brian's shoulders slumped. For the first time, he looked small, like the empire he thought he was building had just turned to dust in his hands. Brian staggered back, his fist loosened. His voice, once so loud, cracked in his throat. Dad, you can't, you wouldn't. But the words died before they could take shape. His friends, the same men who swaggered onto my porch, now looked at each other in silence. One of them muttered, "Let's go." And, just like that, they turned their backs on him. Engines roared to life. Trucks rolled down the gravel drive. The laughter that once fueled his arrogance was gone. Brian stood there alone, the porch light casting long shadows across his face. The officers didn't move. They didn't need to. For the first time, I saw fear in my son's eyes. Not the kind of fear that comes from losing property, but the fear of losing everything he thought he controlled. He dropped the papers onto the ground. The wind caught them, scattering signatures that never mattered. He sank onto the steps, his shoulders slumped, his head in his hands. No words, no fight left. I looked down at him, the man who once was my boy, the man who had chosen greed over blood. And in that moment, I felt no triumph, only a hollow ache, because watching your son fall is not victory. It's tragedy. But still, a part of me whispered, this isn't over yet. Brian sat on the steps, his head buried in his hands. The night pressed down heavy, but I knew it was time. I stood, my knees ached, but my voice carried strong. Brian, I said, you keep asking why you can't touch this house, why every door keeps slamming in your face. He lifted his head, eyes red, desperate. Because it's mine, he snapped. It's supposed to be mine. I shook my head slowly. No, son, it never was, and it never will be. I reached into my coat and pulled out a copy of the document I'd signed weeks ago. The seal of the Mason Creek Veterans Foundation shone under the porch light. This house is no longer Whitaker property. I gave it away. Not for money, not for pride, but to make sure you could never destroy it. It belongs to the men and women who bled for this country, to people who understand sacrifice, not greed. Brian's mouth opened, but no sound came. The officers exchanged glances. Even they seemed stunned. I stepped closer, placing the paper on the step between us. You wanted to bury me with shame, but I buried your claim instead. This house is untouchable, because I chose honor over blood. The night air fell still, and for the first time, Brian realized the truth. He had not just lost a house, he had lost his father's respect. Brian stared at the paper lying on the step. His lips trembled. His eyes darted from me to the officers, as if someone might still hand him a lifeline. But no one moved. I let the silence drag, each second heavier than the last. Then I spoke, slow, cold, final. You think I gave this house away because I was weak, but you're wrong. I gave it away because strength isn't measured in what you own. It's measured in what you're willing to sacrifice. Brian shook his head, clutching at air. You can't do this to me. You're my father. My voice cut sharp through the night. No, Brian, I was your father, but tonight, you proved you were never my son. The words landed like thunder. His shoulders collapsed. The fight drained out of him. The porch light flickered, casting his shadow small against the wall. I stepped closer, looked him dead in the eyes. I didn't sell this house for money. I gave it away, to protect it from you. The hammer fell. The officers lowered their gaze. Brian buried his face in his hands. A broken man. And I stood taller than I had in years. Not because I won a battle, but because I chose justice. And justice was mine to give. The night after it all ended, I sat one last time on the porch of the house I built. The house Maggie and I called home. The roses still glowed under the moonlight. I reached down, touched a petal, and whispered, "Goodbye, love. We kept our promise." The next morning I packed a single suitcase, just clothes, and a wooden box filled with Maggie's letters, our wedding photo, and a folded flag from my service days. When the van from the Mason Creek Veterans Home pulled up, the driver asked if I needed help. I shook my head. I can still walk on my own. As the house faded in the rearview mirror, I felt no regret, because a house is just wood and stone. But dignity is eternal. At the Veterans Home, familiar faces greeted me. Men who wore the same scars, men who understood sacrifice. I set the box on a shelf in my new room. Maggie's photo leaned against the wall, and for the first time in years, I felt peace. Brian had tried to take everything from me, but in the end, he gave me freedom instead. I closed my eyes, listening to the quiet hum of the place, and whispered, "This isn't the end, Maggie. This is the beginning of my last chapter, and I'll write it with honor." I've learned something in these long 74 years. Betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it wears your own last name. Brian was my blood, my only son, but he chose greed over love, and I chose justice over silence. This story isn't about winning. It isn't about property. It's about dignity. about keeping a promise to the woman I loved and to myself. I know some of you listening have felt the same sting, maybe from a child, maybe from a brother, maybe from someone you trusted more than life itself. So I ask you, what would you have done? Would you have fought back, or would you have walked away? Leave your truth below. Your story matters. Your voice deserves to be heard. And if you believe stories like this shouldn't be buried, if you believe justice still has a place in this world, stay with us. Subscribe, because every week I'll share another story. A story of betrayal, of pain, of revenge, and of justice. Not all endings are happy, but sometimes the truth itself is the victory. This was mine, and now it belongs to you.